loose items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. Randal Kleiser grew up with a poster of Disneyland above his bed. He knew every square inch, and when he finally got to go, he knew exactly where everything was, like he'd been there 1,000 times before. That passion for Disney eventually helped foster a love of filmmaking, and years later, Randal would have his own attraction at Disneyland that kids would be seeking out. Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. The director of such hits as Grease, Flight of the Navigator, and Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, Randal has had an amazing career that spans both decades and technology as he continues to push the boundaries of what filmmaking can be. Randal was kind enough to sit down with me to talk about his college years with roommate George Lucas, working with wolf dogs out in the wild on White Fang, and just how they pulled off all those special effects on Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. All of that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders. Randal Kleiser, thank you so much for being on Dreamfinders. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So there's a ton of wonderful films that we'll get to touch on in the interview, but I want to start with a little picture by Sunrise Productions' Orgy Beach Party. Tell us a little bit about your time at USC and the Clean Cut Cinema Club.
Wow, you've done some research. George Lucas was my roommate in college, and we had this company, this little organization called the Clean Cut Cinema Club, because everybody had beards except us. And then, of course, George grew a beard. And so but at the beginning, he was part of that. We made a movie. It was a takeoff on American International. And it was a 16 millimeter film. The first film I think George did, he did one more called Freiheit, which I was also in. A wind-up black and white Bolex film. But Orgy Beach Party was like, it was a takeoff of the Beach Party movies where you saw the movie and then you heard the executives from American International commenting on it as you watched it. That was the concept. And it turned out really, really badly, and we have copies that no one will ever see.
That's fine. I made films in college I wouldn't want people to see either. That's the staple of a filmmaker for sure. Though the thing is, of course, at that time, filmmaking's a kind of an expensive hobby. Did you have other creative outlets growing up beyond just film, or was that always sort of a pursuit of yours?
I wanted to be an animated cartoonist for Disney when I was a kid, and I did a lot of drawing and a lot of cartoons and comic book type things. But I did actually make several 8 millimeter animated films using the cell technique with ink on one side and paint on the other, and shooting an 8 millimeter, and that was very complicated. And I did do one little short that I wanted to take to show Walt Disney, and I was in Philadelphia. My parents drove across the country in our 1958 station wagon, and drove up to the gate, and I had the little yellow Kodak box, and I wanted to show it to Disney, and the guard with the Mickey Mouse on his patch on his shoulder said, "Do you have an appointment?" We didn't, so I was turned away, and I gave up animating.
That was it. You just decided no more animation for you because you couldn't get in.
Right. So I changed to live action. And
live action served you well. I mean, you got several opportunities, really cool opportunities, surrounding yourself with people who have... What I think is interesting about your kind of overall career is even from the beginning, you've been someone who's been interested in filmmakers who like inventiveness and want to innovate in filmmaking technology. And you shadowed someone who people know very well for his comedy and maybe his directing, but also he was a pioneer in the video assist, which is Jerry Lewis.
That's true. Yeah.
What did you learn from that experience working and sort of shadowing Lewis as he was directing?
Well, he, as an actor, had spent time on the sets learning everybody's position on a set. So he knew how to load a 35mm Mitchell. He knew how to work a Nagra. He actually was instrumental in bringing the Nagras over from Switzerland to be part of the Hollywood community's tools. And he knew about dealing with actors and dealing with the crew and the technology. So he called it the Total Filmmaker, and his book that he wrote, The Total Filmmaker, was based on our classes that we took with him. He had tapes of all the classes and made the book out of that. And one of the classes I still have a tape of, which was him analyzing one of my student films, which was really cool. I haven't listened to it in years, but I guess I'll make that part of my memoirs as I work on it.
Let's talk a little bit about Peach, which is your short film. It was your master thesis, and now it's got the credit of being part of the National Film Registry. What inspired you you didn't just direct it, you wrote it. What inspired Peach?
I had started my master's thesis based on a play called Voyages, which was a very arty kind of play here in LA by the Company Theater. And I got halfway through and ran out of money because, as you mentioned, shooting in those days was very expensive. You had to buy the film, you had to have special equipment, you had to have sound equipment, editing equipment was all different. It wasn't like today where you can do it all on a laptop. So I ran out of money. I tried to get grants to finish it. Nobody was interested. It was kind of too out there, too arty. And I went to my friend Curtis Harrington, who was a director I knew, and I said, what do I do? I'm stuck with a half-finished master's thesis. And he said, well, abandon that and do something personal. And that at that time, that was around Christmas time, and I went home to the East Coast to visit my dying grandmother in a nursing home, and I took pictures there because it was the last time I would be seeing her. And I sort of documented it with photographs and the whole visit. And then when I got back, I started writing the story of that visit. And that became the new master's thesis. And that's what took off.
What I think is sort of a nice bookending of what you've currently been doing, and then of course Peach, is in both Peach and in a new project you've been doing. Bruce Davidson, who people might know from the X-Men films, shows up in both. He was in your VR series Defrost. What was it like reconnecting with Bruce? Had you worked with him since Peach?
Yes, we worked several times together. I think we did The Gathering, which is a movie that won an Emmy for Best TV Movie of 19 whatever. And then I worked with him on, he did a cameo in It's My Party. And then I think we did some other stuff. I can't really recall right now, The Gathering. He's been my friend, and I'm his son's godfather, and we're very good, close friends.
Tell us a little bit about Defrost. What engages you to shoot a film in full 360 VR?
My brother Jeff is a visual effects supervisor who's helped me throughout my career. He helped me with the spaceship in Flight of the Navigator, the look of that, and the changing shape, and the image-based lighting that we used for the first time. And so he showed me the Oculus Rift when it first came out, the developer kit, and I was blown away by the possibilities of integrating acting and storytelling into it. And so I found a script that I had written back in college that I'd never made. It was going to be a feature called Defrost. And thinking about it, it seemed like the ideal way to integrate acting and 360, because the viewer can become the character, the main character, and everything happens to the viewer, and people are talking to the viewer eye to eye. And this was really kind of like a type of virtual reality. People say, oh, it's 360, it's not virtual reality, but it is virtual reality because it's reality, but it's virtual. So those people who have problems talking about it. I mean, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience was virtual reality. That was the first time I did that. I was pulled into that world, and I loved it because you're creating an experience for a viewer that feels like it's something that it isn't, that you're really there inside, immersive part of it, and feeling and seeing and smelling all those things. So doing that film was actually got me interested in virtual reality, which led eventually to Defrost.
Well, let's head on back to the 1970s to a little TV movie, a project you did called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which, of course, people know for also starring John Travolta. Was this the connection that got you into the director's chair for Grease, or was it something else?
Yes, it was, because John was very hot suddenly after Boy in the Plastic Bubble and Welcome Back, Kotter, and he was given a 3-picture deal at Paramount, and so he told them that he would like to work with me again, and I think he was instrumental in me getting the directing assignment for Grease. I had worked with Robert Stigwood before, who was a producer of Grease, and I had done a TV movie for him. So actually, I was the only person that they both had worked with, which I think also.
Now, I am not going to ask you a ton of questions about Grease because you've answered probably a billion of them. Thank you. But I do want to.
I have a book, by the way. Wait 1 second.
That's what I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about the director's notebook of Grease. What inspired you to write Grease, the director's notebook?
Well, I saw Francis Coppola's Godfather book, and I thought, wow, I've got my old book up in the attic. Why don't I do that? So I went to HarperCollins, and they were interested, and we got it. It's out now on Amazon. Grease, the director's notebook, and it has every answer that anybody could have ever want in there.
There is one question I'm interested in, and it's sort of side connected to Grease, which is, a lot of creatives have sort of a tension between wanting their work to be remembered, but also not be anchored down by what they've done before. But you seem to have embraced Grease wholeheartedly, and you wrote the book, and you have all these answers for people in the book. Has that always been the case throughout your career, that you didn't have a tension with being attached to something that's so culturally impactful, or was that sort of a relationship that you had to work on throughout the decades?
Well, it was really, I guess, I forget what year it was, but I had sort of forgotten pretty much about Grease for a while, but then they were doing a midnight show at the New Beverly Theater, and I called up John and Didi Khan and said, hey, do you want to go see what the audience reaction is like? And they said, sure. So we went at midnight and saw it, and they went crazy over the movie. And we said, wow, this is still hitting people. And we went outside, and the whole audience came outside and were singing, and we go together. And so I started thinking, well, maybe this sing-alongs would work. And I was being approached by these type of things. And so we worked out a way to have a PowerPoint that would project the lyrics onto the screen for film festivals, and I noticed that it was not going away, and so I did a few of those, and then Paramount heard about it, and then they did a sing-along version, and then they took it to the Hollywood Bowl, and 17,000 people showed up in costume. So, it sort of had its own momentum after that, and then I realized that it's not just an old movie; it's like a touchstone for so many people and so many generations in so many countries around the world that it was just a phenomenon. So I couldn't ignore it, and so I embraced it.
Let's talk about some things that have been culturally impactful for Disney nerds, and that is several projects that you've done for Disney. How did you end up getting attached to Fly the Navigator, which, oddly enough, is a Disney picture by distribution only, correct?
Yeah, it was kind of a co-production. Actually, they were very hands-on in it. It was Producers Sales Organization and Disney. Disney wanted to make a family movie, and Producers Sales Organization, Mark Damon, wanted to make an action adventure with for the international market. So the two areas were pulling in the two different directions, and I was in the middle, trying to make it work for both, and I think it turned out working for both.
You also sort of beat films like Terminator 2 when it comes to rendering metal and CGI for the drone ship. Was this an innovation that you sort of pushed for, or was this something that sort of came along with the project?
Well, I wanted to do something different that hadn't been done in movies before, because there've been a lot of spaceship movies. And especially E.T. was very big, and this had a sort of a similar feel to E.T., a boy in a spaceship, a boy and an alien being. So I wanted to find a way to make it completely different, and my brother Jeff was working in New York on a company called Digital Effects, which then became like Kleenex, right? But he was doing a Tide commercial where the Tide bottle changed into the United States and it morphed. And I thought, wow, that would be cool for the spaceship. And then he also showed me some tests of image-based lighting where you take a CG model and take the background and wrap it onto it so it looks reflective. So he could put those two things together and create the spaceship.
Another interesting thing about the film that people sort of know, of course, at this point, is that Paul Reubens goes uncredited for his role as the voice of the ship. How did you end up casting Reubens in the role?
That's a good question. Let me think. Well, we tried many, many different ways to do the voice. We had the kind of things you put on the throat when people have cancer. We tried that. We tried all kinds of electronic devices to try to create a sound that you'd never heard before, or trying all kinds of experiments. And I guess I met Paul at a party or something and talked to him about it. And he said, I asked him if he could do it, and he said yes, and then that's how it happened, I guess. I think it was a party.
What had you seen him in? I'm trying to think of the timeline. Had he already sort of done Pee-wee's Big Adventure at that point? Is that sort of how he was known at that point, or was he still doing Groundlings and things at that point?
That's a good question. I'd have to look at a timeline in terms of. I can't remember. I know he was doing Pee-wee, but I don't know where he was doing Pee-wee.
Yeah, because he, of course, does it in a bunch of different ways throughout his career, including, of course, Big Top Pee-wee, which you directed as well. Did you end up connecting with Paul, because of Flight of the Navigator? You decided he wanted you to direct that?
Yes, I did. And we had a party at my house to launch Big Top Pee-wee, and Tim Burton came to it. And we had a mariachi band there and a live elephant. And Paul came through the house on a baby elephant and rode around the pool while the band played tequila. It's probably the most spectacular party I've ever had. It was really, really cool. And Gina Davis was riding the elephant, and Richard Chamberlain. It was a real Hollywood party.
You also, of course, directed White Fang for Disney, starring Ethan Hawke. Film adaptations of White Fang, of course, have been going on since 1925. Did you attempt some unique angle with your version, or did you find the adaptation of a kind of a classic novel to be difficult?
The book White Fang was written from the point of view of the wolf, and so that's a hard thing to do if you're doing a Disney movie that you want to have families come to and relate to, although they have done it a lot with just animals. But our concept was to take the idea of Jack London going to the Yukon, as he did, and following him and showing the beats that he later wrote about in his book. So there's Easter eggs in there. There's the Saint Bernard from Call of the Wild is on the ship when he first arrives, and things like that all the way through. And then, in addition, we did research about the Yukon at that time and found the Stairway to Heaven, or the Golden Staircase, I guess it was called, a real place where all the miners would go up this narrow path to the top. We found photos of that. We went to where it happened and we recreated it and got all the people from the villages or towns around to be part of it. And they were all so excited to recreate something that they had. It was kind of their heritage, this amazing shot of all these miners going up the hill. So that was something we layered in. And we just told it from the point of view of Jack London and how he would have found these things. So, of course, it was dramatized, and a lot of elements were put in there, but that was the main concept.
Some people might love to know that the wolf dog in the film, known as Jed, also appeared in John Carpenter's The Thing. Did you find the process of working with an animal challenging, and especially because it's out in the wild and there's a lot of interesting things about doing production out there anyway? What was that experience like working with such a central animal?
Well, we had a wonderful trainer named Clint Rao who was in sync with Jed, his dog. But he had many dogs, really. He had like about 4 white fangs. Jed was the star white fang, and then we had other ones to play other types of actions. But Clint would be, Jed was treated like a star. He would, had his own trailer, and and sometimes Clint would say he's depressed, he doesn't want to work, and things like that. So it was a new experience. But the amazing thing was the way he could control Jed and have him hit marks. And I had seen a movie called The Bear, which Jean-Jacques Annaud, I think, did. I think that was his name. But what I was amazed by was, as I recall, there was camera moves with the animals, and I thought that was really, really incredible. So I tried to emulate that in White Fang, where the camera would move with the animals as if they were an actor, going from one spot to another. The camera would dolly with them and come to a stop when they did, and things like that, which gave it a control that is not normal in these kind of movies, and made it more of a little elevated kind of cinematic feel to it.
Next up, another film that you did, and one that connects with sort of our main topic today, is Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, which is a favorite of mine. I love it, and just watched it recently. I'm curious, were conversations about Shrunk with the audience happening while you were making the sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, or were you sort of attached to one and then audience came later?
Yeah, I was just concentrating on the movie, and it wasn't until it was completely finished and everything that Jeffrey Katzenberg said, "Hey, do you want to do a theme park attraction?" And I jumped at that because that sounded so cool. Since when I was a kid, I had a map of Disneyland over my bed, and that was my goal, was to go to Disneyland.
Tell me about your love of Disneyland. Did you get to go a lot as a kid, or was it always sort of a dream?
Only once, the time that I went out to try to show my animated cartoon to Disney. That was the time we went to Disneyland. And of course, I knew every nook and cranny because I'd studied it and I had it over my bed. And I wanted to stay there for days and days, but we only went there for one day. And I was very angry that we had to go to Knott's Berry Farm. But I had it completely, I was just in heaven going to Disneyland because it was really something. And then years later, when I was in college and rooming with George Lucas, he and a bunch of friends knew I loved Disneyland. They blindfolded me and said, "We're going somewhere," and I didn't know where. And they ended up taking me to Disneyland. And oddly enough, decades later, when Honey, I Shrunk the Audience opened at Disneyland, right across from it was the Star Wars tour, which was George Lucas's thing. So we had two attractions across from each other in Tomorrowland.
It's roommates to the end, apparently.
Yeah.
I should ask you about that first trip, though. Do you remember? I love hearing about people's first trips to Disneyland. Do you remember any attraction that just stuck with you? Like you had looked at the map, you knew everything, and this was the one thing that you desperately wanted to experience?
I think it was the rocket ship, where you sit in there and they had a projection on the floor of taking off and leaving Disneyland, going to space. And if you looked up, you could see the moon coming closer. I thought that was kind of a virtual reality thing, actually.
Of course, Blew Up the Kid marks the first film for Kerry Russell. Did she come to your attention because she had already been doing some stuff? She was in the Disney family as a cast member of the all-new Mickey Mouse Club, or was it just a normal audition that she came in for?
I think it was the Mickey Mouse Club. I saw her on that and thought she'd be right for this, and yeah, that's how it came about.
I'm curious about you can answer a thing I have about one scene in the movie, which I've always been curious about, which is there's a moment where Rick Moranis plays a restaurant with Adam, and he's just trying to feed him dinner, but the nature of the scene is so I don't know, unique and quirky, that it feels like it had to be sort of the nature of working with the child and sort of improv on the spot. Was it all scripted, or was that just an improv with Moranis and the kid?
Total improv. Rick was great about that, and we had to do a lot of improving with the kid because he was 2 years old, and he didn't even know he was in a movie. He just knew there was a lot of people around doing things, and he learned things like when we say rolling, he learned to say no rolling, and he learned to say, I want to go to my trailer, and there were two of them. They were twins, and so when one would get ornery, we would switch out to the other one. They were always dressed and sitting there, so we had to trick them into everything. But Rick was great at improvising with them.
Well, I guess I should ask then, what do you prefer working with? The old phrase, of course, W.C. Fields is never work with children or animals. Which one did you prefer working with, kids or animals?
Well, it's a whole different way of working. It's not like working with actors. So each one is different, and I don't mind either, but in short bursts. I wouldn't want to spend my whole career working with either of them. But it's fun to try with both.
Let me ask you a little bit about the technical side of doing Blew Up the Kid. What was something, some innovation in the film? Because even now today, if you watch it, it really works, having this giant baby in different areas. It doesn't feel like some old trick. It still feels very fleshed out and real for the moment. What were some of the technical innovations that you tried to work in when it came to that film?
Well, we had Tom Smith, who used to be head of ILM as our visual effects supervisor, and we were doing a lot of things the blue screen way, with rotoscoping. Actually, I rotoscoped one scene when the baby's walking down the street because I just thought rotoscoping was cool, and I did it during the looping session. I was sitting there doing rotoscope while I was directing the looping session. That was fun. But the technical innovations was actually going back in time to Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which had this great forced perspective stuff in it. And on the same stage that they shot Darby O'Gill, we did the same thing with Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, where we built a set with two scales and shot with the baby in the foreground and the people in the background. And that was the most fun for me because it turned out great. It looked so real, and it was all done on the camera.
Let's talk a little bit then about your work in Shrunk the Audience. As of course you've already mentioned, this is sort of its own virtual reality. I think for those who don't remember, and I would be shocked if this is a very niche audience that listens to this, but I just to make sure everyone's on the same page, Shrunk the Audience, of course, was a 3D show. It took place. It looked like you were looking at a stage, and the people were doing things sort of in the right size they would be if they were literally in front of you on the stage. And then, of course, you had on the sides, you had different angles, cameras that were on the stage. You could see the camera people. Those angles were also happening on those side monitors to kind of give you close-ups and things like that.
We want to have like big live video screens on the side, as if they would be if you were watching a live show. Because the look of live video, that sharp quality of live video on a big screen, really gives you the feeling that it's happening now. And the way we did that to seduce the audience into thinking they were looking at a live show was we started with a scrim in front of the stage. So you see the Imagination Institute when you walk in and sit down, like a scrim. Mm-hmm. Well, a scrim is almost like a curtain, but very flat. And then when the show before the show starts, there's some disturbance behind it, and you can see, we start the film going, and you can see through the scrim the 3D set with people back there, and that looked totally real. And because, of course, it was shot in 70 millimeter, and that's pretty sharp, but the fact that they were behind the scrim made it look even more real. And the girl pushes against the scrim, that moves, and that gave a reality too. So it looked like there were all these people, live people behind these scrim, to set up the fact that this was a real thing and not a movie. And then later, I think Rick Moranis breaks through the scrim and flies out on a little device in front of the scrim, and he's flying there talking to the audience. One of the things that I noticed in 3D movies is that if you look into the camera, it looks like you're looking at whoever is in the audience. It gives you total eye contact. So I threw in a little improv there, a little line where he is flying with his whirring blades, and he looks right into the camera and says, "Watch out, those blades are sharp." Because people usually, when something comes out in their face, they reach up to touch it, and so we timed it so it would happen just when people were about to reach up and try to touch it. So it gave a super reality, because the instinct to grab it, and then he says, looks right at you and says, "Don't, watch out, the blades are sharp." I thought that was really effective.
I'm curious about, so throughout the piece, there are several moments that I would call blackout moments. So after Wayne hits the sign, there's a small blackout, and then when the mice run about, there's a power outage and there's a blackout. I'm assuming these were areas where you were able to cut, and so it feels at the end like a continuous presentation, but you were able to then sort of shoot it kind of scene by scene. Was that the intention?
Absolutely. We came up with that idea of the powers going out so we could do it in sections, because otherwise it would be impossible to do all of that in one. And strangely enough, later on, when I did Defrost, we were doing the same thing, trying to create a seamless live event. But in those episodes, which reach 5 minutes, we did not cut. We shot continuously. But yes, if you're trying to make it feel like virtual reality, you can't have a cut.
Were the rehearsals with the actors any different? Since so much of it, even with those cuts, it's very long. It's very kind of play-like, because they are in many aspects sort of acting to an audience, opposed to the camera, which could be a lot more intimate and close. How did you guys sort of get the actors in the right sort of frame of mind for what they were doing? Because it's so unique.
Well, we rehearsed it like a play, and we had a proscenium and everything. We shot it at the Goldwyn Studios, which is now called The Lot, and we had a big sound stage, and we built the stage on the sound stage the exact size of the theater that was going to be at Tomorrowland. So it was all precisely worked out, and we had two 70 millimeter cameras, one shooting down into a mirror and one shooting straight, so we could get the 3D effect. And Dean Semler was the cameraman, and so it was all worked out really, really specifically with 3D experts about how far the camera had to be from the stage to precisely lock into the Tomorrowland stage or screen. And it was all very technical. Get it right. And another technical thing that was difficult was when you shoot, you're trying to create the idea of live reality. You can't have things out of focus, because that's not the way the eye works. So we had 3 levels really that we had to shoot. The young boy in the foreground who had been shrunk at one point, the midground where we had the actors talking to the audience, and then in the background were the technicians moving around, so at one section of the film. So we had to shoot that in 3 different passes, but have it all work in terms of the story. So we had to work the playback so that everybody was talking at the right times and moving around at the right times. And that was quite complicated. Because,
of course, the idea there is you're simulating everyone's eyes to sort of focus on what you still need them to focus on, which, right. What a challenge. I can only imagine. when they're shrunk, when the whole audience gets shrunk down, the majority of it is from a really low angle. And so I was curious if that was done through lens choice or if the camera was just on the ground sort of looking up. How did you get that super small feeling of them staring up at the characters and things of that nature?
Well, we moved the camera into the stage and put it right on the deck, just below the deck, so that it was looking up. And I think I put one scene, there was something on a TV or a mirror, I can't remember, where the kid is carrying the audience, and you see the audience for a second. I don't know. Was it TV or a mirror?
I think it was a television. It was a monitor for one of the cameras. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have that moment so that people could say, "Oh, there you are," and try to catch themselves. So that was fun to build that little fake theater, and we had to put the kid's hands on the side so it looked like he'd picked up the theater, and that was another layer. So we had 4 layers that all had to be in sync, and luckily we had those cut points because it was really hard to concentrate on all those layers for more than a couple minutes.
Last point on Shrunk of the Audience is, and I would probably get killed by my audience if I didn't ask, which is you get to work with the great Eric Idle as Dr. Nigel Channing, and I'm curious what it's like working with a python. He has an excellent book, an autobiography that he mentions doing audience and enjoying the experience. But what was it like working with Mr. Idle?
I loved working with him. He was so funny and great on the set. I just found when I was getting ready to do this interview, I looked at some old stuff and found a moment, I think, on the set where people were just hanging out and he was laughing and joking with everybody. So, yeah, he was a delight to work with, and no problem at all. He was completely professional and one of these delights to work with.
Since Audience, of course, you've continued to push tech boundaries in film with things like Defrost, as we talked about. And I'd like to finish up talking a little bit about something that ties back to Grease, interestingly enough, but also has technology involved, which was something you did with Intel Studios. And it's Grease at 40. And they use this volumetric capture system to recreate You're the One That I Want in AR technology. And you mentioned in an interview for Intel that you think putting actors into gaming engines could very well be the future for film. What do you think filmmaking looks in 20 years like? Wow,
20 years. It's hard to figure out what it'll be like in 5 years.
That's true.
That's a crazy question because I'm just dazzled by all the stuff that's just happened in the last couple months with the deep fakes. Have you seen them? The round table deep fake?
Yes.
I mean, when you see that, you start to think, what is the world going to be like? What is filmmaking going to be like in 5 years? 20 years, I have no idea. But 5 years, it's hard to figure out because everything's happening so quickly. And when you take something like those deep fakes and put them into a game engine, you can do anything with. It's just the imagination is the only thing that's the well, you know what I'm saying. When I'm trying to think about your question, my mind's spinning because I can't imagine how things are going to change.
Is technology still what sort of gives you a passion for filmmaking, or are there other angles in filmmaking that you're still? What keeps you doing it? What keeps you excited about making movies?
Well, it's kind of like going back to the very beginning of telling stories and creating magic and wonder in people, especially illusions. I love illusions. I love magic. I love visual effects. I just was looking at Peter Allenshaw's book. I saw a documentary on him, and then I realized I had this wonderful book that Peter Ellenshaw gave me, and I looked at that this morning. The matte shots that he did for all these wonderful movies. Just the visual imagination that Walt Disney had, and he was such an inspiration to me. He was my idol. Disney, and then it was so bizarre to end up being roommates with the next Disney. So anyhow, it's what George has done is similar and amazing. When you see what even just recently the Mandalorian, how that was shot.
Yeah.
I was down the set of that. Looking at that, the way they filmed that was mind-blowing, and everything is changing, and technology is adding these new tools that who knows where they're going to go.
Well, Randal Kleiser, thank you so much for coming on Dreamfinders. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been fun, and it was great to think back on Honey, I Shrunk the Audience.
And that's it for this episode of Dreamfinders. Thanks so much to Randal Kleiser for being my guest. Dreamfinders is edited by Shannon Mickelson with quality control by Ben Harris. It's hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at SomeStuffISaid. Our podcast artwork is provided by JP Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. Tell your friends about the show, and please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And if someone you know would make a great guest on this program, feel free to email us at dreamfinders@WDWNT.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.